Chapter 6. Hag of the Mist. The mornings grew chillier as fall settled in, with fog stretching over the town like a damp, cold blanket. Ferry could still feel the crisp air, despite his mother's efforts to bundle him up each morning. He barely walked, hunched against the cold, muttering a faint greeting to Matilda as they crossed paths on their way to school. Ben would join them a few houses down, and the three friends walked in silence all the way to school. One misty morning, as their footsteps echoed on the wet pavement, a piercing scream shattered the quiet air, followed by three distinct claps. Ferry stopped walking. "Did you hear that?" he said, his voice trembling. Matilda and Ben also stopped. "Hear what?" asked Matilda, frowning. The wailing was gone. His friends shrugged and kept walking. They'd gotten used to Ferry's peculiarities. As Ferry's heart raced with fear, he suddenly heard the shriek once more, echoing through the eerie silence like a woman's cry of despair. The sound of horse hooves thundered in the distance, growing louder with each passing second. Then, emerging from the thick fog, a chilling sight met his eyes. A sinister carriage, drawn by headless horses, its ghastly form resembling a black coffin. Before Ferry could utter a word, the carriage vanished into the mist, leaving behind a trail of dread. The woman's wailing lingered in the air, only to be swallowed by the dense fog. Ferry gasped. "Did you see that? The carriage that went by." "What carriage?" Ben wondered. "We don't have carriages around here. Maybe cars, but the only cars we see are the ones heading to the sawmill. And of course, Mr. Pride's car, but he hardly ever drives around here." Ferry remained quiet for the rest of the road. At school, he couldn't concentrate and didn't feel like joining in any games during the break. Even his favorite lettuce sandwich tasted bland. Not even May's smile could cheer him up. The spooky vision stayed with him all afternoon. At home, he couldn't find his peace. Even his mum's delicious chestnut pudding didn't taste as usual. Drawing didn't help either. To forget about his strange day, he thought about visiting his new friend, Benjamin Knight. Ferry had the best time whenever he visited Ben. The Knights were just like any other family in Goodhots. Ben's dad worked at the sawmill, and his mom looked after their house and children. Ben had three younger sisters who, unlike him, were the friskiest, most restless girls Ferry had ever met. Just like Ben, they all had dark hair and sun-kissed complexions. And just like Ben, they were thrilled each time Ferry paid a visit. Their favorite thing was to play with him in the sitting room. Within minutes, the room would transform, with toys soaring through the air, carpets crumpled, and furniture rearranged. That didn't seem to bother Mrs. Knight. "A perfectly tidy home with children usually means the children are unwell," she would say. When she saw Ferry at the door that late afternoon, she greeted him with a smile, brushing flour from her apron. "Come in, Ferry, come in. I'm just baking some apple pie," she said, her smile bright and inviting. As he stepped inside, the memory of the eerie sight faded. The scent of apple pie greeted him, along with the comforting warmth of the crackling fire in the fireplace. Across from it stood Mr. Knight's armchair, where he would rest after a day's work. The Knight girls, Bella, Bianca, and Belinda, greeted him with joyous shouts the moment they saw him. "Ferry, let's play the fairies," said Bella, the oldest of the three. Ferry stretched out his arms and joined the girls in their lively romp around the room. Amidst their laughter and play, something caught his eye. In Mr. Knight's armchair, nestled amongst the cushions, and basking in the warmth of the fire, lay a curious creature, a lizard-like being with an oddly human resemblance. Its eyes remained shut, its face lacking eyebrows, while its nose and mouth were scarcely defined. Surprisingly, it had hands and feet with 3 fingers each, connected by a thin membrane. Ferry couldn't believe his eyes. The creature even had palms. Struggling to admit its presence, Ferry expected it to vanish like the other apparitions he'd seen. Yet to his surprise, it remained, even opening its eyes to reveal a deep, intelligent gaze. Determined to make it go away, Ferry decided to sit on the chair where the creature lay. That's when he heard Ben's voice behind him, shouting in despair, "Wait! Wait! You're sitting on Izzy! You are sitting on Izzy!" With the most gentle gesture, Ben took the creature in his arms. So he could see it too. The lizard perched on his shoulder, blinking at Ferry. "What's that?" asked Ferry, pointing at the reptile. "That's my lizard, Izzy. Where did you find it?" Ferry wondered. "It's the weirdest lizard I've ever seen." "I didn't find him," Ben replied, obviously upset about Ferry's treatment of his pet. "Izzy came to our door last summer, on a stormy night. He sat in that armchair from the beginning. He only gets down when Dad comes home. At night, he asks to go outside and comes back the next morning. I've tried to follow him, but he's too fast." "It seems to me he was the one who found you," said Ferry. "You could say that," Ben admitted, gently stroking the lizard's neat, squeaky head. "But Ben, have you ever thought that maybe it's not a lizard? A lizard doesn't look like that." Ben frowned. "I thought about it. He doesn't have scales, or a tail. But he doesn't look like any other animal I know. Maybe he's a lizard with malformations. Now let's leave Izzy to rest." "Come on, we have to study," said Ben, carefully placing Izzy back on the pillows. But just before the two boys left the room, Ferry could swear the lizard winked at him. The creature continued to puzzle him as he entered Ben's room. It was the tidiest room in the house, with only a bed, a chair, and a small table occupying the space. The walls were adorned with posters of astronauts and rockets, a testament to Ben's dream of becoming a space explorer one day. Studying couldn't go any slower. Ferry's mind wandered, and he couldn't focus on anything. After finishing their homework, the two boys dashed to the sitting room, where Mrs. Knight had set out a large plate of apple pie. The pie was delicious, and the room was filled with warmth and the sound of children's laughter. That's how Mr. Knight found them when he returned from work, greeted by all his children jumping on his back and tugging at his long, dark mustaches. "It's dreadful weather out there," he said as he took off his coat. "The fog's so thick you can cut it with a knife." Caught in the games and the warmth of the night's home, Ferry hadn't noticed the time slipping away. He glanced out the window and sprang to his feet. "I must go. It's late and my mother is probably worried," he said, quickly donning his coat. "Thank you for the pie, Mrs. Knight. Goodbye, Mr. Knight. Bye, girls, and see you tomorrow, Ben." With that, he dashed out the door. Outside, the air was chilly and the darkness was thick, enveloping the streets and houses in a milky fog. Ferry set off, his home not far from Ben's. Yet the journey felt longer than usual. The cold wrapped around him, making him shiver like a leaf in the wind. The street lanterns cast a feeble light, struggling to penetrate the dense mist. After a while, Ferry noticed he was stepping up, almost running, as his steps gained an echo. Looking behind, he couldn't see anyone. Just then, a terrible wailing froze him in place, the same as the one in the morning. It grew louder and closer, accompanied by the clatter of hooves. Ferry hid behind a tree on the side of the road, barely daring to breathe. He wasn't fast enough, and the carriage would eventually catch up. He wasn't afraid of many things in this world, for he had seen a lot, but this apparition was truly frightening, even for him. Emerging from the mist, the sinister carriage reappeared, the headless horses charging ahead. This time, Ferry got a better look at the coachman. He was horrified to see the carriage was driven by a headless man. The wailing persisted. Someone inside the carriage was crying. But the carriage didn't stop, and Ferry realized whoever was inside wasn't following him. Then a thought struck him. He had to follow the carriage. Despite being already late, his curiosity got the best of him, as always. Ferry sprinted faster than he ever had before, feeling as though he was gliding over the ground. The deserted streets were a blur as the carriage sped ahead on the wet pavement. Suddenly, the headless coachman brought the horses to a sudden halt. The carriage stopped in front of a familiar house. It was Matilda's. Only one room on the first floor was dimly lit, even at that late hour. Suddenly, the carriage door creaked open, and the most frightening creature emerged. An old woman, older than any Ferry had ever seen. Her clothes were the color of mist, her hair like hemp, tangled and wild. She wailed and lamented, clutching her head, with tears flowing from her swollen red eyes. Drawing closer to the gate, she gazed up at the dimly lit room on the first floor. Then she began to sing. A haunting, twisted melody in a strange tongue that blended with the howling wind of the night, sending shivers down Fairy's spine. With a hiss and a screech, she collapsed into a shapeless mass of darkness, then vanished altogether. Terrified by the scene before him, Fairy's heart sank, and he fled, without looking back until he reached home. That night, Fairy's sleep was haunted by the eerie song and the spectral hag of the mist. The next day at school, Miss Summer informed the entire class that Matilda would not come to school the following days. Her grandmother, who had been battling a severe illness for some time, had passed away the night before,